Just let them know it's happening. Okay,
Okay.
here they come.
Although they may get a notice.
Yeah, I think they probably will. Okay, here they come.
Hello. Is that you, Ethan?
Hi, Steve.
Can you see me?
I can see you.
I'm not seeing anybody here. Hold on a second.
Hi, Grant.
Hey, Robert.
Richard. Hey, buddy.
Hey, John. Hi, Ethan.
Tell me what that means.
There we go.
Is that
All right.
working?
Good to
Is
see everybody.
Has everybody got feed?
Yeah, we still have 2 more to sign on.
No worries.
Okay, well, before we start, I'll let you know, warn you ahead of time that Lena's recording for any sliver of information that might be useful later
Okay.
on our side. You know, we're not going to
Yeah, nice
obviously.
to meet
Hey,
That's Lena, for if anyone hasn't met her yet. She's our social media guru, and she organizes Richard and I and keeps us on task.
okay, good.
Yeah, it's a pivotal role at Shunyata.
I thought that was your wife's role.
No. I need multiple managers.
Work wife. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, not just
I'm
one.
the anti-social media manager.
Yeah, and if I'm away from home, my daughters fill that role. You know.
Right.
Yeah, somebody's got to keep me in line at all times.
Mike just arrived.
And I know Jason is intending to, so
Well, Jason doesn't really matter anyway.
Squirrely little Jason.
that's what we say. Did we have Mike and then lose him?
It looks like it.
Oh,
Oh, nope,
back.
we got him.
So I know your time is relatively tight, and I'm not trying to provide anything more than an introduction to the grounding system and just kind of an overview of what we'd all like to accomplish, you included, with the grounding system. We are very close to market now. It's been, gosh, years between supply chain and then our own idiosyncratic way of making sure that this is a product that goes out with the full amount of support that's necessary, that we feel is necessary, so that every person that tries it gets a consistent result. Because consistency is the key, I think, to everything we make. We're trying to achieve a consistent result. And to do that with a grounding system, the system itself is exceedingly simple. The connections are straightforward. There's not a lot of complexity in terms of having to go through multiple layers and thought processes to connecting it. But there are going to be differences, of course, as each system is different. The grounding, the ALTAIRA grounding system will be installed in a way that's most complementary to that specific system. So we'll get into just the basics and show you the parts and pieces. We'd love feedback at any point. So we're not trying to do a formal presentation here. It can be as interactive as you'd like it to be. So feel free to speak up with any questions or potential issues or something that doesn't make sense. And, Richard, myself, or Lena be happy to chime in and fill in the blanks as they come up. Robert asked me, I'll say it once again, since maybe not everybody was here, but we just like to be full disclosure that we're recording the session only to pick through and choose whatever we can use from it for our own information. And, because we're learning too every time we have a conversation, or, I was just at Music Lovers in Berkeley and in San Francisco last week, kind of demonstrating the system for them. And of course, every time I go into a system and interact with people in the field, you learn something. So this is a process. We've already done quite a bit with it. We've sent it to a lot of our people that influence us with their opinions. But we haven't been able to send the system out to as many as we like, because we wanted to wait to send it to you until it had all the actual parts and pieces that are going to be field ready. I want you to experience the system as the customer will experience the system, and not in kind of a formative state. So with this Zoom, this kind of starts the point where we can make it accessible. So you guys can get a system of it, or maybe a couple of you can get a system of it, play with it, and interact with us over it, so we can together kind of come up with a read on how to work with customers with it, because obviously we're going to be doing a lot of that as well. So your feedback would be really valuable. Robert asked me at the outset to say a little bit about the Venom X cables, the interconnects, speaker cables, the power cord, and then we make the USB Ethernet, and is it BNC also, Richard? Yeah. So that's a complete integrated system, because Kalen feels strongly that it's the best product we make in signal cable if you take into account its value, the way that he's priced it, and the materials that he's paid to put into it. So our margin on it is very low, because we're continuing to grow a good reputation in signal cable that we'd like to see increase. And the Venom X represents that product at an accessible price point that we feel will bring a lot of new adopters to the family of cables that we make, by their experience with a more affordable Venom X line of cables. I think we sent out an email to you guys that had a review in a magazine out of the Netherlands that you should probably pay some attention to, not because it covered our product, but because it's a very credible review magazine that measures everything. And I don't mean measuring things like with an NTEC noise sniffer or something like that. I mean, they've spent serious money on test equipment, measurement equipment, and then they measure and they listen. The review I sent was of, I think there were 12 different sets of cables. And the Venom X was included in that. We had nothing to do with the review. Our distributor in the Netherlands had supplied it to this review site. They're kind of very independent, I guess, as review sites, as review entities go. They're pretty neutral, which again speaks well of them. If you read that article, it's very non-partisan. You know, they're not picking favorites necessarily. They're just kind of reporting on what they found, and then adding the subjective listening impressions, of course, which are, that's the opinion part of it. But the results of it, I think the reason I'm mentioning it is because it's the first time that I've seen independent measurements of a wide variety of different cables. And of course, the Venom X came out really well. The speaker cable was measured as the most conductive of all the speaker cables under test. It had one of the lowest capacitive signatures, and I believe it was the lowest inductive signature of any of the cables, which speaks to, a very neutral cable. So I think they put it in the top 3. I don't know that they declared a winner, other than an upper echelon of the top performers in that class, of which the Venom X was one. Given the subjective nature of how different cables fit into into the variety of systems that are out there. That's no guarantee of success, but it does fit like a hand in the glove to the feedback that we've received already from Germany, Hong Kong, Netherlands, other places. Even the guys in San Francisco, they've bought a ton of it because they find it's the best cable they have, which includes a lot of transparent that they're is their main signal cable at that shop. They found the Venom X. They like the Venom X cable as well as anything they've tried in that price category, and we're getting that kind of feedback from other sources as well. So if you haven't had the opportunity to interact with customers about it, and you do get that opportunity in the future, we'd love to know about it, good or bad, whether a customer has a favorable experience with it or, picked another favorite for their particular system. Because they're new products, like anything, people always ask me at the outset, well, how good is this? And I said, I won't know for 6 months, because it takes that amount of time to gather the amount of feedback that you need to really tell a detailed story about the performance of a cable. It's peaks and valleys included. So we're kind of still in that information gathering stage. Venom X is out for review at a couple locations, soundstage included. So we should be getting more press on that, but we'd really like to see some feedback from the field. So if you guys have that opportunity to encourage customers to try it or compare it to other cables in its price class, we'd certainly be curious to know how that goes.
Have you guys had any experience yet with Venom X?
I have,
Speaker cables, very positive. For a guy that's not a Shunyata guy, he liked them a lot. That's the one bar I've done with him so far, and the feedback was positive.
Good.
He's making his mind up.
Is it
Sure.
correct that the, for the speaker cable that are they welded modular connectors? Is that what you're doing?
Richard, do you want to show them?
Yeah, there are STIS version 3. So they're the pure copper STIS versions. And I'm going to bring
So
them in.
is the base of it welded?
It's soldered.
It's soldered, okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, no, these are not sonic welded. So this is, again, the STIS version 3. I don't know how well you guys can see that.
we can see it.
Okay, and what it has is the set screw right here. The version 1s had the threads. These ones have this small set screw. And all you do is back that set screw off, spade comes off, and then you change it to banana.
What's the difference between version 2 and version 3?
Base metal. The version 2 base metal of STIS wasn't the purity of copper that we expected out of it. So that's why when we discovered that, we held off on those V2s and we rebuilt them.
Okay, so they're compatible. We can forget about them. Anybody ordering anything going forward, it's either going to be 1 or 3, right?
Generally, yes. What somebody might need too as well for replacement connections. I've been told that the version 2 is probably compatible and version 3 is compatible into version 2, but I think there's a slight diameter difference. So if we still have V2 models, so if there's a V2 owner that has a broken banana, we'll probably send them V2s as warranty replacements.
Hmm,
And I
Okay.
think it's pretty telling that I can't be sure, but I didn't see any others that promoted it in that review, that we use interchangeable connectors, yet that Venom speaker cable was still the most conductive out of all 12 speaker cables that were tested. So that speaks to the level of quality of termination and the lack of loss that you experience in those interchangeable connections.
Yeah.
So, despite having that feature, which of course is very attractive to a lot of customers, you've not only not lost any conductivity, it's actually one of the most, if not, well, the most in that test, the most conductive speaker, or one of the more conductive speaker cables on the market.
And all of the products in that series are flexible, right?
Correct.
You want to show them the power cord, Richard?
Yeah, so this is the Venom X EF. The highlight of this cable is its flexibility, which again, you can roll this around really easily on itself. We've actually got photos of this wound around a Coke can, basically.
Smaller than that. It's
I
just-
can wrap it around my pinky.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the one of the big features is this is one of our CopperCon low profile IEC connectors. Now, the unique thing about this model is it's only available with this connector. It's not available with a C19 connection. This is only a C15 power cable with the low profile CopperCon connector.
And why not one of the better connectors at the wall end?
Cost.
Yeah, anytime you use a pure connector made of pure copper, and again, I can't speak to the other players in that price class, but I'd be pretty surprised if there were other $700 power cords out there with pure copper base metal. I mean, they might be copper plated. There might be those out there. Copper plating, as we all know, is hundredths of an inch. You could scratch right through it. Most of the base metals on products, certainly at that price range, and I think quite a bit more expensive products, the base metal is brass. And again, the base metal is what gives you the conductivity.
Now, you mentioned that you're doing an SPDIF cable, but you said it was BNC. Are you providing a BNC to RCA adapter then, or what are you doing for SPDIF?
We've got SPDIF Venom X cables.
Yeah.
Right, in BNC or RCA,
Correct.
or do you
Yeah.
use an adapter?
No adapter.
No, okay.
Yeah, so in order to fill out the line, which Kalen really wanted to do, which models are pretty much the same as the Delta, Richard? Is it the
Just
this-
the USB, as far as I know. USB Ethernet.
Just USB. I
think
think
it's just-
Ethernet is the.
Yeah, the USB and on the Venom X and the Delta USB are essentially the same product. But Kalen wanted to fill out that particular product spot, and he couldn't find a way to make it, because the price difference isn't that great. It would have been nearly impossible to create a unique SKU at that particular price point.
Is that the only Venom X and Delta that's bumping into each other then?
Yes.
So you will continue with Delta?
We will continue with Delta. I do think that over time, and it could be I mean, we have lots of Delta, but that Venom X is definitely going to squeeze Delta. If you have a customer that's thinking of the Delta in signal cable, and they might be a little bit price stressed on that, the Venom X speaker cable and interconnect are going to surprise a lot of customers that try them, and even comparing them to more expensive cables, they're going to be pretty surprised. Those interconnects especially are very unique in that they use a little bit of silver in them, and so the Venom X interconnect is compared to the Delta interconnect is going to be more upfront, more timing and dynamics oriented. It's going to sound like it's got a greater low level resolution than the Delta, which is going to be a warmer, unabashedly copper sounding interconnect. So the Venom X interconnect and the Delta interconnect are very different. And you could say the same thing about the Alpha and the Sigma versus the Venom X. It's definitely got a unique presentation. So far it's been very well received. We haven't heard the B word from anybody calling it bright or edgy. So it's settled in quite nicely. Customers might go through a short period during break-in where it can get a little bit aggressive, but once it settles down and then the KPIP kaolin applies to it, takes a lot of that aggression away. Much as the power cables, you guys know the V2 power cables now pretty well compared to the V1s. So the Venom X is a little bit like that kind of a difference. The V2 power cords are definitely much more impactful at the lower frequencies. They sound a bit more extended at the top and then have kind of a nice mid-range clarity, whereas the V1s sounded a little bit more euphonic by comparison to the V2s. So the Venom X is going to have that kind of a sound. So it is a different sound for us. It brings us, from away from the Cardis side, the old Cardis cable side of neutral, and a little bit closer to the center from a typical Shunyata interconnect product. So that's something worth understanding, at least the difference. So if customers ask about, well, what's different about the Venom X and the Delta interconnect, you'll be able to tell them, and that'll be the result, because that's what we hear across the board. And by and large, the people that have compared so far have really liked the Venom X, even complimenting it when comparing it to the Delta or the Alpha, because it has that kind of a difference in presentation. So a lot of our,
I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
At that point, is it even worth talking about Delta? I mean, does Delta have any advantages over Venom X?
Yeah. So the Delta has the advantage of having a much more uniform kind of a softer tone, a richness, a fullness. I call it a little bit more euphonic, but that's going to suit some systems a lot more than others. I don't think of the Delta as traditionally euphonic in the way that you'd call the old Cardis Golden Cross euphonic, but compared to the Venom X, it's going to sound softer. The extension at the uppermost frequency, will be a little bit lower than the Venom X, or to the listener, it'll appear the information's still there, but you're going to, that difference in tone. If somebody has like an all esoteric digital stack and they've got esoteric amps and they've got Magico speakers, maybe the Delta is the better choice, right? Because of it's going to disappear a little bit more into an all solid state, all digital system. But if somebody already likes the sound of their system and it's well balanced and they're happy with it, but they really want to try to amp up this or that characteristic in performance, the Venom X definitely is that product that's going to allow them to hear more of what they want their system to sound like without tipping it over into brittleness, brightness. Whereas the Delta is more of a kind of a traditional interconnect that somebody would bring into the system saying, God, my system's got all these rough edges on it, and maybe I want to counterbalance that a little bit. The Alpha brings it back to a little bit more neutrality, but the Alpha and Sigma interconnects still have at their core a richness, a body. They're more varied in tone. I love copper interconnects. I've gone through a lot of silver prototypes here, but that Sigma interconnect, and I've tried other silver cables here, and I'm not generally a fan of silver cables, but the Venom X doesn't really present like that. It's got a little bit more warmth than a traditional silver sounding cable. But it's not going to solve a brightness problem. If somebody's trying to solve a problem with brightness in their system, the Venom X won't solve that. And I'm not sure the Delta will either at just one pair of interconnects, but it certainly comes a lot closer to helping than something as neutral as the Venom X.
All right.
So
Okay. So
yeah.
anyone else, any other questions on Venom X, or should we shift over to the grounding?
Yeah, we need to get moving.
Grounding, please.
Grounding it is.
Well, like I said, this is kind of an intro. I've covered a bit about it. The grounding, just for context, size context, the ALTAIRA chassis ground box is sitting on top of the Denali. So that's kind of its form factor. It has a decent amount of weight to it. It is reasonably heavy. I don't know.
It was
Maybe-
heavier than I thought it was. It almost tipped me over. Kidding.
Yeah. So we
So
can,
those are 5-way binding posts and there's no connection to the wall.
well, there's definitely at some point, well, we haven't connected anything yet. Can we go, Richard, can we switch the view to the back?
Yeah, I've got the back in this one shot right here.
No, I mean with the cell phone video. Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Can you square it up a little bit, right, Richard? Because we're looking at a pretty steep angle. Yeah, thanks.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Wait,
Whatever, Jason. Whatever.
So you could probably tell me as well as I can tell you what these posts represent. The one on the far left is the main terminal. And that's what would connect to a ground point. It could be an outlet. Richard, do you want to show them that dummy AC plug? Bring it right up to the camera so the guys can see. So that's an AC plug that has the hot and neutral pins made out of that polycarbonate. And then it has the live ground post. So if a customer doesn't have a Denali or Delta Everest, in their system, they can connect that using one of our pigtails. Do you want to show them the other end of that, Richard, or is that the cable itself?
This is the base cable with the banana that'll allow you to connect to a wall outlet if you don't have a Denali or an Everest.
so if you have a Denali or an Everest, you plug that into the ground post on the rear?
Yes, this is the connection or this to the ground post of the Denali, the Everest, or the Triton, or Delta, or whatever you have.
So do you want to connect that to the Denali, Richard, using yeah. So that's the ground post on the Denali,
So
which
this
is a
is
little,
now connected to the Denali. This is representing a connection from ALTAIRA to Denali. Now, if the customer does not have a Denali, they don't have a ground post like this, that's when basically I could alternate these just so I have use of the banana. Now this will be your connection to the wall.
and obviously you'd want that to be the wall outlet that supports, the main aspect of the system, because the goal here is to unify the ground plane, right? That's one of the benefits of using a ground station, is to unify the ground plane. But with all the, some customers are going to have their amplifiers plugged into dedicated lines, and so you're working with 3 different separate grounds going to separate breakers, and using a ground box like that kind of squares everything up on the same ground plane, which is one of the reasons you get a benefit in performance. If you look at the 6 posts that are on the back of this chassis ground unit, each one of those posts is filtered with filtering that's calibrated to the specific frequencies that are commonly found that ride on chassis, or in our signal ground box, they would ride inside the component on the signal grounds. So they're kind of in that, megahertz, low gigahertz range of filtering. And so each one of those is isolating the chassis borne noise and filtering it independently on each one of those ground posts.
And And each of these ground posts will receive a spade and or a banana.
Right. So you
So-
can double up on those posts. So let's say you had 7 components. You could still run a spade off one component and then run a banana off another component into that same. You're not going to get the same level of isolative filtering as if you had just one component, but you can double them up. And you can also double them up and triple them up. I think Kalen said a max of 3 on that main terminal.
So where are you plugging in on the components?
So on the components, you can, Kalen has instructed us to include a tool, not with the package, but we tell customers that probably the most valuable tool a customer can have in his system anyway is a volt ohm meter. They're about $50. I'm sure you guys know what they are. We're getting a little glare, yeah. We recommend just to check for continuity to make sure that when you're making connections, you're making a connection that's actually that has continuity between the component and the ground station. You want to establish or confirm that the component connectors are grounded to chassis, because then you don't necessarily need to use a chassis screw. You can use an unused RCA or an unused XLR port on the component to get that chassis ground. I like the idea of doing that versus the chassis screw, because if you use a chassis screw, you can lose some continuity because of the powder coat that goes over metal, which is another reason you want to check for continuity after you've made the connection. Richard, do you want to show them how that?
Yeah, and what we
Okay.
kind of determined is the number one priority connection for chassis grounding would be a dedicated chassis ground post on the back of a component. So if your component has that, that's what you're going to use for chassis grounding. Alternatively, beyond that, if they don't, that's when these tests come into play. And you can use the chassis screw, but because of powder coating and I'd say lack of good, strong connection between that screw and basically the spade from the ground cable, it's a little risky. And that's where we default to the RCA barrel, because the RCA barrels are generally grounded to chassis. And that's what we're going to demonstrate. So Kalen prefers this meter because it's analog. And what you want to do is you want to set it to the lowest setting of ohm, which on this meter is going to be RX1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it down to RX1. Now it's got a little calibration on the side of it, a little wheel you can spin.
Richard, can I add a note?
Yep.
Because I ran into this at Music Lovers. A lot of dealers will have ohm meters, but often they're in the mega ohm and kilo ohm range. They don't have a lower ohm setting. And the reason that Kalen recommends the analog meters is they do have what's normally standard on most volt ohm meters or ohm meters is a low ohm setting. And you want that just because we're dealing in smaller signals here that the kilo or the mega ohm settings won't pick up. So if somebody's got a kilo or mega ohm volt ohm meter, it's probably not going to work. Now, is it absolutely necessary that somebody has these? I would say that about 90% of the electronics out there are grounding to chassis from the signal connectors. So that covers a lot of territory. Unfortunately, there are also components like Constellation Electronics is one example that has independent ground isolation in the unit. So there is no way to chassis ground a Constellation component. And there are other components like that. We're trying to put a list together so that does not mean that our grounding system won't work. or any grounding system for that matter. It just means that you have to go a slightly different route with that component. Just briefly, in terms of the constellation system, you would only use our signal ground box with that unit, with those components, because there are no chassis grounds, so there's no point. In fact, I think it might be slightly counterproductive to try and chassis ground a component that doesn't use chassis ground for its its grounding.
So for clarification, so with the when you're checking with the voltometer, are you checking continuity between the ground on the RCA connector and the chassis, or between the ground on the RCA connector and the other end of the cable?
So you'd want to run it from the ground pin on the component to the chassis initially, so you can just see that the component is grounded to chassis. Do you want to show them that, Richard?
I will. So first of all, what I want to do is we're gonna basically calibrate the ohm meter. So can you guys see the screen right there?
Yeah.
So Lena's gonna touch the two leads together. So you see where that's at? That's upwards of 2 ohms. I want to roll this dial down to 0. So for the sake of not being straight on, we're right about 0. Okay.
Because that's the reference when you touch the two leads together.
Correct. So now Lena's going to hold that. What I'm going to do here, if you can see, the IEC ground pin, that's what we're using as our baseline. And then I will touch a chassis screw, and I will also touch the barrel of the RCA, and you guys can watch the readout here. So I am firmly planted to that IEC ground pin, and then I'm going to come up top to a chassis screw. We're at 1 ohm, or we're at 0. So the chassis screw is grounded, or the IEC is grounded to chassis.
Yeah.
Now, if I move over to the RCA barrel here, there's a big delay,
It's there.
but the RCA is also grounded to chassis. So now we know this RCA can be used as a chassis ground. That makes sense?
So it's a very helpful tool for anybody that wants to get the best result possible. Of course, many customers aren't going to bother. They're not going to want to invest in a voltometer, despite the fact that we recommend that they do. And, there's going to be a little bit more variability if they don't do that than if they kind of check everything. This will all be in the guide that the customer receives. So you're not required to commit all of this to memory now. I just kind of wanted to give you an overview. We've got an enormous amount of information that's coming with this, so that, not to bog people down with it, but to give people every tool that they need to make this system successful. Because one thing we've learned in the last year, where we've been piecemealing these test systems out to individuals, is that they're very consistent. We haven't gotten an odd result if the context is controlled, meaning that they're using the voltometer and they're just making the basic connections.
I have a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
One, this sounds an awful lot like an off branch of the original CGS concept, which was grounding chassis to the Denali or the Everest. Is this basically the same thing, just rebadged, like where you're actually now putting a box in the way that allows everything to come to one place, or is this, how is this different from CGS?
Yeah, no, this is way more evolved. I mean, this is way more evolved than what's, if you're connecting to the Everest or Denali, basically the noise reduction you're getting is from the passive noise isolation chambers that are in the Denali or in the Everest, and then you're getting the ground unification. So yeah, you're absolutely getting, in many cases, a benefit. It won't be nearly as dramatic as the benefits you get from this. Obviously, even so far, I mean, my eyes are rolling because it's a process to install this system, and there's no point to it, clearly, if you're not going to get a pretty dramatic punch out of it. And based on the feedback we've had, there are people that feel, including our famous beta guy in Minneapolis, Dr. Melby, who said this is by far the best product Kalen's ever put into the market, based on the difference it made in his system. And we've had that repeated to us 4 or 5 times. So these are not shrinking violets in terms of the performance envelope that they bring to a system. You don't have to do a lot of crazy A/B nonsense with these to hear the difference. Although, having said that, it's super easy. Richard did this the eval kind of on a rolling around the clock basis at the Florida show. You know, back when we thought we'd have all the parts by May.
Well, I
And
think
and
what I'm
you know,
getting at is, like, this seems like an evolution of the CGS technology, where basically you're grounding the chassis of all the devices together. I don't understand what the difference is between this, other than the fact that you now have the ALTAIRA box.
well, there. I don't know if you were at the beginning of this, Jason, but I mentioned there are very highly calibrated filtering sets on the back of each one of those posts.
Oh, no, that part I heard.
Yeah. So there's quite a bit more robust noise reduction built into these units than there is into the passive noise isolation chambers, and it's much more targeted, frequency targeted, than the noise isolation chamber noise reduction, which is just kind of a global, a global noise reduction thing that's in the Everest and the Denali. That's not to say the Everest and the Denali, obviously they've earned their reputations in the market. They're as good as the best out there in what they do as power distributors, but we're not talking about power distributors. We're only talking about grounding. And in terms of the way that these grounding boxes filter noise, they're much more advanced than anything in the grounding section of the Denali or the Everest. So they make a bigger difference than either the Everest or the Denali could make by just connecting the components to the ground, because number one, you've already got the components plugged in and grounded through the Everest and the Denali. So the advantage of the ground posts on the Everest and the Denali, other than benefiting this system greatly, the only benefit then is if you've got a remote component that's not plugged into the Everest and you want to run a ground cable from that component to the post on the Everest to unify that component on the same ground plane that all the other components are grounded to, typically an amplifier or amplifiers, running ground wires to the Everest posts unifies the ground and then gets a little bit of noise reduction on the ground from the noise isolation chambers in the Denali, the Everest, the Delta, whatever it is they're using. So they're almost, they're very different products in that way.
So, I want to just circle back to the determination that the RCA is grounded to chassis. One of the more brilliant aspects of what Kalen has done for creating the ground cables and all the interfaces that you can use for these ground cables across signal grounding and chassis grounding, we're going to have a base cable, and this base cable is going to come with a banana and a spade. Now they are STIS. These base cable terminations can change. But for instance, if a customer buys a alpha base cable like this, and they've determined that one of their components requires an RCA connection for ground, they'll take their spade and they'll tie it in here, and then they'll use a pigtail. And these are cool. So we're designing. Oh, that doesn't look that good, does it? It looks better when I hold them up here.
Just one at a time, I think, is good too.
So this is a VTX AG pigtail that has RCA on it. We've got XLR, or male and female. We've got USB A and B, Ethernet, BNC. These are all the various connections that people can use to connect. And basically,
Richard Grant, I've got to bail. I have a previous commitment. So
Don't
I've
worry.
gotta bail.
we'll be in touch.
I'll fill you in later, John. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
So coming back in with the other end of this ground cable, we would connect this pigtail, which has the RCA on it here, and that would then ground this chassis to the Altera by way of
those
the RCA through the pigtail and then connected to chassis grounding post number 1.
And those are all super secure copper connections. So you're getting, very high degree of continuity, connectivity, conductivity, whatever you want to call it, using those tails. And they give you that endless variety of flexibility with connections, which is unique in this market, in this segment of the market. So customers just need to buy their base cable lengths, and then they need to add the pigtails that they require for the system. And I think do we have different spades available, Richard? Different size spades?
We do have different spades. We're also going to offer 2 levels of ground cable. Pigtails, which is just the VTX conductors, and then gray is VTX AG. So for those customers that are using alpha, sigma, and omega ground cables, they'll want to go with the VTX AG pigtail. Venom X, and Delta, they'll use just the VTX pigtails.
So that's the pigtails. What about the ground cables? Are they also the 2 series?
There's going to be 5 options. There's Venom and Delta, which will be VTX, and then Alpha, Sigma, and Omega all utilize VTX AG conductors.
And before our minds blow up with that many options, it's going to be in our documentation that the big jumps, of course, is going from the pure copper to the silver copper hybrid, the VTX AG. So the Venom X, or the Venom ground cable will be the baseline that everybody can get. And then the big jump from there is the Alpha, because that's where the VTX AG starts. And silver being so highly conductive, of course, the effect of the grounding boxes goes up proportionately once you introduce silver into this equation. So the VTX AG is the big jump in performance. From there, going to Sigma, yes, it's better. It's bigger gauge, but we're talking more incremental. Going from Venom to Alpha, I'd like to see those 2 become kind of the standards. One is the customer can get that product, bring it home, get a great result, and then upgrade as he sees fit. The VTX AG, that customer is buying, he's got a higher end system, and then the Sigma and Omega exist as options for you when you get these customers that have the big systems that they've spent the big money on, and so it doesn't really make sense to piecemeal something together. The cables that are the most important in this system are the cables that are interconnecting the boxes. So if you're interconnecting the chassis ground box to your power distributor, and you've got 2 or 3 meters worth of cable, it might be worth considering upgrading to the next level of cable. So if you're running the system with Venom and you've got an exceptionally long cable in that mix, using the higher grade of cable will yield a proportionate result that benefits the system. So go ahead.
I was going to say, so with 5 levels of cable, I mean, what are the differences as you go up? I mean, you mentioned VTX versus VTX AG, but that doesn't really explain what makes a Venom X better or equivalent to it? Like, what makes the Delta better than a Venom X? What makes the
For the,
Delta better than
There
the,
is no X.
whatever?
right, there's no Venom, yeah, there's no Venom X, but that was my fault. I misspoke earlier. It's Venom, Delta, Alpha, Sigma, Omega. And the differences are kind of, they follow right along with, you know, heavier gauge, higher conductivity. You're getting, you know, if you use the silver, you're going to get more of an immediate impact. Most customers will say, oh, I can really hear it in the bass. But that's not necessarily, you know, it's frequency wide. They just notice it in the bass because there's more air moving, or they sense that there's more impact, you know, in the lower octaves. I get this with power cables all the time. You know, I really hear it in the bass. Well, it's frequency wide. It's just more noticeable in the bass because you're actually moving air. And so you're going to get more perceived frequency extension. It probably also a quieter background. Those filters may be becoming a little bit more engaged in terms of the tech, you know, the minutia of it, the technicality of it. Kalen would be better speaking to that than I would, but I do know that gauge matters, conductivity matters in terms of the performance of this system. And you can readily hear the difference as more immediate and more controlled in the lower octaves, more extension in the upper octaves, and more transparency in the mid-range. Much like it's really no different than upgrading through the power cables. If you know what the differences are in the power cables, the grounding cables follows a very similar course. And the Omega cable at the very top end of the range, that has a common mode filter built onto it. You know, or a common mode filter module, which in and of itself filters additional noise. So for long runs of cable, having that filter in place is also beneficial. But again, that's kind of at the extreme end. And I don't want to keep you guys too much longer, so I'm just going to mention the signal ALTAIRA, and that's Richard's placed that on top of the chassis ALTAIRA. And the reason I mention it last and only for a couple minutes is that that's the unit that you can add to the system to really get the max benefit from this, you know, what is rightfully called a grounding system, because now we've got a second box that has a slightly different purpose. The purpose of the signal box isn't to connect all the signal connections necessarily. It's to isolate digital from analog in the system by using any unused signal port. So if you've got an unused RCA, SPDIF, BNC, AES, whatever the connection is, I think its best effect is for customers that have digital suites of components. So they've got a server, they've got a streamer, they've got a DAC, they've got a clock, they've got a switch. Connecting all of those digital components to the signal box and isolate, you know, kind of firewalling the noise that these digital components generate and that rides on their signal grounds and rides on the chassis. The connecting those components, which may already be chassis grounded. So you want a chassis ground assist. That's why we show the chassis ground box first. That covers most whole systems. Nobody has to worry about adding the signal ground box unless they want to, or, you know, they ask about it, that kind of thing. Once you've established the chassis ground box in the system and you're getting the result we expect you to get, they're going to want to add that if their system justifies it. And I just described one system type that would justify it. A reference level system that has multiple digital components that you want to isolate or wall off the noise component of that system from the rest of the components.
Grant, just quick question on this. So you said we plug in unused ports into this. So like if the guy's got an unused, say like an AES EBU or an unused BNC, he would plug that into this. And does this box then connect down to the main box, or is it a completely separate thing?
No, you connect the main terminal of that to the main terminal of the chassis ground box. So you don't want to use the signal ground box in isolation. you want to use the signal ground box in conjunction with the chassis ground. So the signal box would connect via its main terminal to the chassis ground box.
It's
And
in
then
parallel.
Right. And then the chassis ground box connects to the, whichever that ground connection is for you. If it's a Denali, or if it's your wall outlet, or if it's the outlet on a Niagara, you can still make that connection.
So to be clear, though, are you connecting those digital components? You've got two grounding leads coming off of them, one going to the signal version and one going to the chassis version?
Correct. So but like I said, you want to establish the chassis ground box first.
No, I get that, but
Right.
so
And
in
once
the
once-
advantage of adding the additional box, I don't understand how that could make any.
So
why
there,
that would be-
right. So especially with digital components, but you could make the same case for analog, but it's easier to explain it in the digital domain. Digital components, we all are aware that they generate a ton of noise. It's one of the struggles that we all deal with in trying to get the best sound out of our system. People used to think that it's just the CD technology, when actually it's power supply generated noise and internal circuit generated noise. And what are the most proximal components to the signal grounds? Well, it's the digital circuitry in the components. So there's a ton of accumulated digitally generated noise that rides on the signal grounds of digital components. And the more of those open connections that you cover, it's not that different than like a shorting plug, but this is much more, this provides a much more dramatic result than using shorting plugs. By connecting the open signal ports to the signal ground box, as you start adding more of those connections, the difference grows and grows and grows. So you could just connect one and that's enough, or you could connect 5, and that's going to get progressively better. Once you start removing the noise that's just kind of idling on those signal grounds, and you're filtering that basically out of the system. And once you've connected the digital and you've grounded all the digital signal ports to the signal box, you'd be surprised at how much better the analog portion of your system will sound. So it's not only benefiting the digital system, it's benefiting the entirety of the system by eliminating digitally generated circuit-borne noise from the digital component, the digital section of the system. I could turn this around and explain the same benefit for somebody that's using, multi-component analog front ends. There aren't as many of those out there. They're few and far between, but the benefit is the same, by making those connections that are open, and walling off that analog portion of the system from your preamp and your amplifier.
So are the names signal ground and chassis ground? It sounds like it's actually the same system. One isn't grounding the signal and the other one's grounding the chassis. They're both grounding the same thing, right?
Well, what the signal ground box is doing is it's filtering the noise off of the signal grounds that exist inside the components. What the chassis ground box is doing is it's filtering the noise that's commonly riding, because our music system environments are bathed in radio frequency interference. Electromagnetic interference is everywhere. So you have no shortage of noise that surrounds. It's like a plume of smoke around your system. There's a lot of noise there. And just as our power system, the reason that Kalen puts a filter in the power cords is because he understands that there is no panacea. There is no 100% of noise reduction without creating a cost to dynamics or a cost to some other aspect of performance. So he's doing this kind of layered noise isolation, and the ground boxes fit that narrative to a T. They're just another way for you to start removing a higher percentage of noise from the system. And
No,
what
I'm just trying to distinguish between you calling something a signal ground. Is the pigtail at the end of the signal ground cable different? Is it plugging into the hot RCA and not the ground on the RCA?
No. It's just plugging into whatever unused.
So
whatever-
it's also taking the same ground. It's
So that-
tapping into the same ground.
So the signal ground box is the filters are set differently. They're filtering a higher frequency of noise. And I guess the question you're asking is, are we double, triple, and quadruple chassis grounding with the signal ground box? Meaning that they're kind of the same. The concepts of their design are different. The filtering's different. And what we're trying to do is isolate a section of the system that is either particularly prone to signal degradation from noise or particularly prone to generating noise. So after you've chassis grounded, the signal ground box is taking another layer that's specific to one segment of the system out of the equation.
So the difference is what they're filtering in the boxes.
That's what I was gonna say. The way Kalen described it to me was it's the ALTAIRA hub that determines what it's filtering, whether it's chassis borne noise or signal borne noise.
Okay, different question. So if someone, does it make sense? And I can see this happening. Do you have to ground every component in the system for the thing to be effective? Or
No.
can you only ground some? So for instance, the guy with the remote amps.
Right. So the answer is that thankfully we have an easy one. Yes, you can get a huge benefit just by grounding your core components. So your preamp, your DAC or your phonostage, your source, your preamp, or your sources and your preamp. Yes, you would get a very nice benefit from that. And you can still run, and then based on that evaluation, then you can make the decision about whether you want to run a ground cable from your amps. In my opinion, you get the biggest difference, including the amps, because they are on a remote circuit in most cases. And to unify the ground between all your electronics confers a pretty big benefit in and of itself. In fact, that's what most grounding boxes rely on for the benefit that you get. Maybe they put, I don't know what Nordos does. So, but I can tell you what Entreat does, and it's, a lot of lead and metal shavings in a heavy box. They're doing something. But you're getting a huge benefit by unifying the ground if you've got components that are plugged into different places. But you don't have to get everything onto the chassis ground box. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole that you need to present this as a system to somebody. You don't even have to mention the signal ground box if you don't want to, because obviously in most cases, we're going to have to rely on the impression of people that are just trying the chassis ground box.
Right.
So
Right.
at the outset, that's our main goal, is just to get that out there. But we've tested these in some pretty big systems, and the results are definitely consistent.
Okay.
And that's what we're aiming for, and that's why the volt ohm meter exists. Is we're trying to get this absolutely consistent result across all systems.
And it reinforces that there's a scientific basis for it. So can you give us like at least a general idea of pricing for the different elements, the cables, the pigtails, chassis ground, signal ground? What do they cost? What are they going to retail for?
Richard, do you want to do that?
The chassis and the signal ground ALTAIRAs each are going to be $29.95. So it'll be $29.95 per hub. And then the Venom ground cables start at about $150 for the base cable. And I think Omega tops out at about $700 or $800.
50 in the latest price sheet.
What did it say?
Venom is $200 for a 1 meter. Omega is $650 for a 1.25 meter in the latest price sheet.
And those, we will be releasing a new price list with the updated ground cable costs, I'm pretty certain.
Okay.
But we're close. So it's about, I think it's 175 to 200 for Venom and then upwards of 700 plus for Omega.
And as I said before, if somebody wanted to spend a little bit of extra, then the connecting cables, it's kind of, the parallels with the power distribution are pretty clear. Your interconnecting cables between the units are your most important cables, especially, or as you get into longer lengths with any component, those cables, you want to make them as good as you can afford to make them. But the key here for all of us is just to get to first base, get a good first impression. So if a guy just has a phonostage and a preamp and a DAC, then send the chassis ground unit, send the Venom cables, just enough to make connections, and collect an opinion. And based on my confidence after having talked to a lot of people that have tested it and I've tested them myself, I think that's all we need to do to make that first impression. And then the customer is going to, in many cases, if they have the budget, make more of an investment in these because they really do work. And they're easy to place. They're that size for a reason. You can, and I just did Robert Harley's entire system, and I think I used 5 total boxes because he's got CH Precision everywhere. Those are all 4 chassis components, and the Watt Axe are 2 chassis. Each Watt Axe is 2 chassis, power supply, and that was quite a system coming out of the gate. And I was able to snug these units into, like on top of his components. They can go anywhere. They can go on their side. They can go, almost anywhere in a system. Obviously, you want them to be centrally located, so you minimize the lengths of cable. But other than that, they go anywhere.
So I wanted to just kind of interject. One of the biggest lifts that we've got going right now is the supporting documents for the release of Altera. How many are there? 4 or 5?
There's going to be a bit of a library. This is Lena, I'm off screen. There's going to be a bit of a library available, but the foundational documents will be somewhere around 5 documents that are available to help understand basic concepts, hub selection, cable selection, and then installation. And we will be accepting feedback on those documents as they go into the wilderness, so that we can continue to answer questions on paper without having to answer questions on the phone. But there will be quite a lot of support collateral available online and in physical form for customers and dealers like yourself that want that information on hand.
Those documents are going to I'd say single-handedly be the best educational tool for yourselves and for customers to understand really why we're doing it, what's necessary. And then honestly too, looking at these systems and what components people have and the lengths, we're going to have worksheets that customers, or on behalf of the customer, the dealer will fill out that verifies the components, the ohm readout, basically just to verify that they can be grounded, and then the length and the termination required for each connection. So really that's the holdup. Once we've got all those documents dialed in, that's going to be really the biggest supporting role we'll be able to offer customers. And for you guys, are the step-by-step decision tree through Altera and why we do what we do.
Yeah, it's a pretty heavy project that we signed up for here, but it's also one of the biggest difference makers in terms of the feedback we've gotten. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to see what it can do in the market. So it's obviously something that most people are going to need to try for themselves, and you are definitely the vanguard for that. You know, given how interactive you are with customers and that everybody gets to try things before making a commitment. So
Is it silver only for the faceplates?
yeah. The nice thing is though, they unlike the Everest, you know, the ALTAIRAs can kind of find unobtrusive spots in the system where they reside. Although I know people like to show off components like that.
Yeah.
So there's a tower version coming.
We've already got one of those. Just briefly, I think, I don't know, Richard, do you have an update on timing? We are bringing back for a limited run the Denali 6000T version. It's going to be a version 2, so it'll essentially name match the Denali shelf unit. We've got a limited amount of chassis. I believe they essentially look the same as the original.
Correct.
And I don't know, I think we have 5075, which represents a lot of money in metal for us. So we are it's going to be kind of a flash they're here sale for people that are interested in them.
Pricing,
Closer towards September, I think.
pricing, 6, 7, 8.
I want to say it's definitely not going to be more than 7, but it's going to be right around there. Yeah, 65 or 7.
And is that 6 outlets on that then?
Yep, yep, just the 6 outlets, same as the S. And the same kind of counterplay as before, where the Denali tower will probably offer a little bit higher level of performance, just because of the makeup, the physical makeup of it is you know, affords it a little bit better performance than the shelf, but it's incremental. You know, they both do the same job. But if somebody were to compare them, you know, back to back, performance wise, they'd probably prefer the tower. So that's all I got. I'm sorry for keeping you longer than you should have been kept.
Yeah, I was figuring that, you know, your 40-minute free Zoom was going to cut us off. What happened?
Well,
We upgraded.
Yeah,
Spent the big bucks, huh?
we upgraded to the talk as much as you want
All right.
app.
Damn
Okay.
it.
All right. Well, thank you for spending the time with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, well, hopefully there'll come a time where I can come out there again and visit. I love New Hope.
All right. Good. Sounds good to me. All right. Thank you.
All right, take care, guys. Thanks
Okay,
for
bye.
staying.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All with questions. You guys know where to find me.
All right.
Lauren.
Thanks, Richard. Nice to meet you, Lena.
Nice to meet you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, good deal.
No, Grant's out. You're like,
out.
bye.